November 15, 1944, near the town of Villerupt in eastern France, Staff Sergeant Tommy "Tank" Morrison crouched behind a frost-covered embankment, watching a German supply train rumble through the valley below at precisely 35 miles per hour. The former University of Alabama quarterback adjusted his grip on what looked like an ordinary football, except this pigskin contained enough TNT to level a city block. Morrison believed he had one shot to prove that an Alabama farm boy could outthink German engineering with nothing but precision timing and a strong arm. He had no idea that his desperate improvisation would become the most talked-about sabotage operation of the entire European campaign. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What unfolded in those next 47 seconds would transform Morrison from a backup demolition specialist into a legend, proving that sometimes the most sophisticated military strategies are no match for good old-fashioned American ingenuity and a quarterback's instinct for reading the field. Staff Sergeant Morrison had arrived in France 3 months earlier as part of the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA, though his background was anything but typical for a covert operative. The 24-year-old from Tuscaloosa had thrown for over 3,000 yards in his senior season at Alabama before the conflict interrupted his dreams of professional football. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 210 pounds, Morrison possessed the kind of natural athleticism that made him invaluable for specialized missions, requiring both physical capability and split-second decision-making. His commanding officer, Major Charles Whitfield, had personally selected Morrison for Operation Linebacker, a joint mission between American OSS agents and French resistance fighters aimed at disrupting German supply lines along the Metz-Thionville railway corridor. The operation's name proved prophetic, though nobody could have predicted how literally Morrison would interpret his football terminology in the field. The intelligence was solid. German forces were moving critical supplies through this particular route every Tuesday and Thursday at approximately 1400 hours. The cargo included ammunition, medical supplies, and most importantly, specialized components for V-2 rocket production bound for launch sites along the Atlantic coast. French resistance member Jean-Claude Dubois had been monitoring the schedule for 6 weeks, noting that the trains typically consisted of 12 to 14 freight cars traveling at consistent speeds between 30 and 40 miles per hour. Morrison's team had originally planned a conventional approach involving planted explosives along the tracks, but German patrols had increased dramatically in recent weeks. 3 previous attempts to position charges had resulted in the capture of 2 French operatives and the compromise of several safe houses. The enemy was learning, adapting, becoming more vigilant with each failed sabotage attempt. "We need something they won't expect," Morrison had told Major Whitfield during their briefing at a farmhouse outside Nancy. "Something that doesn't require us to get close to the tracks." Whitfield studied the tactical map spread across the wooden table, noting the terrain features around the target zone. "The closest we can safely position ourselves is about 60 yards from the rail line. That embankment provides decent cover, but it's too far for conventional thrown charges." Morrison's eyes lit up with possibility. 60 yards. "Major, I can put a football through a tire swing at 70 yards. Give me something with the right weight and trajectory, and I can hit that train." The idea seemed absurd at first. Military doctrine didn't typically incorporate athletic skills from American sports, especially not for precision demolitions work. But as Whitfield examined the topographical surveys and calculated sight lines, Morrison's proposal began to make tactical sense. A projectile delivered from an unexpected angle and distance would bypass German countermeasures entirely. The technical challenges were significant. A standard football weighs approximately 1 pound, but Morrison needed something heavy enough to carry sufficient explosive material while maintaining aerodynamic properties for accurate throwing. Additionally, the timing mechanism had to be precise enough to detonate at exactly the right moment as the train passed beneath the trajectory point. Enter Corporal Eddie Kowalski, a demolitions expert from Chicago, whose father had worked in the stockyards and taught his son everything about controlled explosions. Kowalski had been experimenting with improvised devices since arriving in France, driven by the constant need to adapt American equipment for unconventional warfare scenarios. "The problem isn't making it explode," Kowalski explained to Morrison as they worked in the farmhouse basement. "The problem is making it explode at exactly the right time and place. Too early, and we just scare some cows. Too late, and the train keeps rolling." Their solution involved hollowing out a regulation football and filling the cavity with a precisely measured amount of Composition C explosive, equivalent to roughly 2 pounds of TNT. The detonation mechanism consisted of a modified pressure fuse designed to trigger upon impact, but with a 3-second delay to allow penetration into the target before explosion. The weight distribution proved critical. Kowalski positioned the explosive material to maintain the football's center of gravity while ensuring maximum destructive potential. The finished product weighed 4 pounds and 7 ounces, significantly heavier than a standard ball, but still within Morrison's throwing capability for the required distance. Practice sessions took place in a secluded valley 15 miles from the target zone. Morrison spent hours perfecting his technique, adjusting for the modified weight and trajectory requirements. His natural ability translated remarkably well to the heavier projectile, though the margin for error was considerably smaller than on any football field he had ever played. "Remember, Tommy," Major Whitfield reminded him during their final preparation meeting, "you get one throw. If you miss, that train keeps moving, and we lose 3 months of intelligence gathering. Plus, the Germans will know we're operating in this area." Morrison nodded, feeling the familiar pre-game tension he had experienced before every college matchup. "I understand, sir. One shot, one opportunity." French resistance fighter Marie Blanchard had been monitoring German patrol schedules and confirmed that Tuesday, November 15th, offered the best window for the operation. The weather forecast called for overcast skies with minimal wind, ideal conditions for precision throwing. More importantly, German ground patrols typically followed predictable routes that would leave the target embankment unguarded for approximately 20 minutes during the critical time window. The team moved into position at 1300 hours, exactly 1 hour before the scheduled train passage. Morrison, Kowalski, Dubois, and Blanchard established themselves behind the frost-covered embankment with clear sightlines to the railway below. The distance measured precisely 58 yards from their position to the center of the tracks. Morrison studied the terrain one final time, noting wind direction and any obstacles that might affect trajectory. The valley stretched in a gentle curve, with the railway following the natural contours of the landscape. Telegraph poles marked regular intervals along the tracks, providing reference points for calculating the train's speed and position. At 13:30, Blanchard spotted the first wisp of smoke on the horizon, confirming that the target was approaching on schedule. Through binoculars, Morrison could see the locomotive pulling what appeared to be 13 freight cars, consistent with intelligence reports. The train maintained steady speed, suggesting normal operations with no indication of heightened security measures. "Distance check," Morrison whispered to Kowalski, who was positioned with a rangefinder. 58 yards to track center confirmed. Wind is negligible, maybe 2 miles per hour from the northwest. Morrison hefted the modified football, feeling its unfamiliar weight, but appreciating the solid grip provided by the leather surface. Kowalski had carefully preserved the ball's original lacing and texture, ensuring that Morrison's throwing mechanics would remain as natural as possible. The locomotive rounded the distant curve, its rhythmic chugging growing louder with each passing second. Morrison began his mental calculations, estimating speed, distance, and the precise timing required for impact. Unlike throwing to a stationary target or even a moving receiver, this required predicting the exact position of multiple variables converging at a single point in space and time. 30 seconds, Blanchard whispered, tracking the train's progress through her binoculars. Morrison rose to a crouch, positioning himself for optimal throwing mechanics while remaining concealed behind the embankment. His breathing slowed automatically, a technique learned through countless game situations where precision under pressure meant the difference between victory and defeat. The locomotive's whistle echoed across the valley as it approached a grade crossing 200 yards beyond their position. Morrison used the sound to confirm his timing calculations, noting that the train maintained consistent speed despite the slight upward grade. 15 seconds. Target speed approximately 35 miles per hour. Morrison stood, drawing back his arm in the familiar motion that had earned him all conference honors at Alabama. The weight of the modified football felt substantial, but manageable, like throwing with a slightly deflated ball on a cold day. The locomotive's front cowcatcher came into view through the gap in the embankment. Morrison tracked its movement, calculating the lead distance required for impact with the fifth freight car, which intelligence had identified as carrying ammunition supplies. 5 seconds. Morrison released the football with perfect spiral rotation, his follow-through identical to the motion he had used to complete touchdown passes in Bryant-Denny Stadium. The modified ball traced a perfect arc through the grey November sky, its trajectory carrying it over the locomotive and directly toward the moving freight cars. The projectile struck the fifth car's wooden siding with a solid thunk that was barely audible over the train's mechanical noise. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Morrison held his breath, wondering if the impact fuse had functioned properly or if his desperate gamble had failed entirely. The explosion, when it came, exceeded everyone's expectations. The modified football had penetrated the car's wooden exterior before detonating, creating maximum damage within the confined space. The blast ruptured the car's structure completely, sending debris flying in all directions, while igniting secondary explosions from the ammunition cargo. The fifth car essentially disintegrated, its destruction causing a chain reaction that derailed the sixth and seventh cars while severely damaging the fourth. The locomotive, suddenly encountering massive resistance from the wreckage behind it, ground to a halt in a shower of sparks and steam. German personnel immediately began evacuating the undamaged cars, their shouts echoing across the valley as they attempted to assess the situation and organize response procedures. Morrison's team remained concealed, watching their handiwork with a mixture of amazement and professional satisfaction. "I can't believe that actually worked," Kowalski whispered, his voice filled with genuine admiration for Morrison's precision. Dubois was already scanning the horizon for German reinforcements, knowing that the explosion would attract immediate attention from nearby patrols. "We need to move. They'll have security teams here within 10 minutes. The team gathered their equipment and began withdrawing toward their predetermined escape route, but Morrison lingered for a moment to observe the full impact of his unconventional assault. The destroyed freight car continued burning, sending thick smoke into the overcast sky, while German personnel worked frantically to prevent the fire from spreading to adjacent cars. Intelligence later confirmed that Morrison's single throw had destroyed approximately 200,000 rounds of small arms ammunition, 50 artillery shells, and critically important components for rocket guidance systems. The disruption forced German logistics to reroute supplies through alternate routes, adding weeks of delay to delivery schedules and compromising several strategic operations. More significantly, the psychological impact of the attack created lasting effects among German railway security forces. The apparent randomness and precision of the assault suggested American capabilities that defied conventional understanding. How could enemy operatives deliver explosives with such accuracy from such distance, without approaching the tracks or leaving any traditional evidence of sabotage? German investigators found fragments of leather and lacing near the blast site, but initially dismissed these as debris from damaged cargo. It wasn't until weeks later that intelligence analysts began to suspect that American forces had somehow weaponized sporting equipment for military purposes. Major Whitfield's after-action report described Morrison's performance as exceptional demonstration of adaptive thinking under pressure, though the official documentation omitted specific details about the football-based delivery system. The operation's success led to Morrison's promotion to technical sergeant and assignment to train other OSS personnel in unconventional weapons techniques. Morrison himself struggled to believe what he had accomplished. "I've thrown thousands of passes in my life," he told Kowalski during their extraction to Allied lines, "but I never imagined one would take out a German supply train." The success of Operation Linebacker inspired similar improvised approaches throughout the OSS organization. Teams began experimenting with modified sporting goods, farming implements, and everyday objects as delivery systems for explosive devices. Morrison's quarterback experience became the template for recruiting operatives with specific athletic backgrounds suited to unconventional warfare requirements. French resistance fighters in the region adopted Morrison's approach for subsequent operations, though none achieved quite the same spectacular results. The technique required not just athletic ability, but precise intelligence about timing, positioning, and target characteristics that were difficult to replicate consistently. German countermeasures evolved rapidly in response to the new threat. Railway security forces began posting guards at elevated positions overlooking tracks, specifically watching for projectiles delivered from unexpected angles. The cat-and-mouse game between saboteurs and security forces intensified throughout the winter of 1944. Morrison participated in 6 additional sabotage missions before the war's end, though none required the same dramatic improvisation as the November 15th train attack. His reputation preceded him among both Allied and enemy forces, earning him the nickname "Quarterback" from fellow operatives and creating something approaching legendary status within OSS circles. The technical innovations developed for Morrison's football bomb influenced post-war military research into precision-guided munitions. Engineers studied the principles of athletic throwing mechanics to improve accuracy for various projectile systems, recognizing that human instinct and training could sometimes exceed mechanical guidance systems. After Germany's surrender, Morrison returned to Alabama with the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, though he rarely discussed his wartime experiences with civilian audiences. His brief professional football career with the Birmingham Iron lasted only 2 seasons before a knee injury ended his athletic ambitions permanently. Morrison settled into civilian life as a high school coach in his hometown of Tuscaloosa, where he spent 37 years teaching young quarterbacks the fundamentals of accuracy and decision-making under pressure. His students never knew that their coach had once used those same skills to disrupt enemy supply lines in occupied France. The modified football technique remained classified for decades after the war, mentioned only in sanitized intelligence reports that omitted specific operational details. Morrison's innovation represented one of countless individual adaptations that characterized American unconventional warfare during the conflict, demonstrating how personal skills and creativity could overcome technological limitations. Historians studying OSS operations eventually documented Morrison's achievement as an example of effective improvisation. Though the full story remained buried in classified archives until the 1980s, when details finally emerged, Morrison was in his 60s and reluctant to discuss what he considered simply doing his job under unusual circumstances. "People make too much of it," Morrison said in a rare interview with a military historian. "I was just a soldier with a particular set of skills, trying to help my team win. The football was just the tool we had available." The railway line that Morrison targeted was rebuilt within 6 weeks of the attack, but German logistics never fully recovered from the disruption caused by multiple sabotage operations throughout the region. The cumulative effect of such attacks contributed significantly to Germany's deteriorating supply situation during the final months of the conflict. Morrison's story illustrates how individual initiative and unconventional thinking could achieve strategic results that conventional military doctrine might consider impossible. The integration of athletic skills with military objectives demonstrated American adaptability and resourcefulness that characterized the broader war effort. The psychological impact of Morrison's attack extended far beyond its immediate tactical results. German forces throughout France became increasingly paranoid about unconventional threats, diverting resources to guard against attacks that might come from any direction and using any conceivable weapon. This defensive mentality reduced German operational effectiveness and contributed to their ultimate defeat in the European theater. Technical Sergeant Tommy Morrison returned home to a country that would never fully understand what he and thousands of other unconventional warriors had accomplished in the shadows of the larger conflict. His quarterback instincts had found their ultimate expression not on a football field, but in a frozen French valley where precision timing and steady nerves helped turn the tide of history. The lesson of Morrison's achievement transcended its immediate military significance. In an era of increasingly sophisticated warfare technology, one man with a football and perfect timing had proven that human ingenuity and athletic skill could still change the course of events. Sometimes the most effective weapons are the ones nobody sees coming, and that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.